Welcome to Feral Folktales with me, Papa G. These bonus episodes are where I share the shorter tales, the ones that sit between the full stories on the Feral Folklorist. And if you're new to me, don't miss the main podcast. That's where the 30-minute hauntings and deeper folklore take shape. Today's folktale is The Old Woman Who Lived in a Vinegar Bottle. In some parts of the old country, folks used to tell a story about a river that listened too closely. People said certain stretches of water held a kind of old magic, and if you spoke near it, you ought to be careful about what you asked for. Along one of those bends lived an old woman in a vinegar bottle. She had enough to get by, but she didn't hide the fact that she wanted more. The bottle sat near the bank with the river moving slowly beside it. She swept out the inside each morning, lit a small fire outside, and talked to herself while she worked. Anyone passing by could hear her say she was tired of living in that bottle. She wanted a proper roof. She wanted a little space. She wanted something that didn't smell like vinegar, no matter how many times she scrubbed it. People along that lane knew the river listened. They didn't try to explain it. They just said certain places heard things and didn't forget them. So when the woman stepped outside one morning and said she wished for a cottage, it didn't surprise anyone that a small cottage stood where the bottle had once been. It wasn't large, but it had a door that shut, a window that opened, and a bed that didn't touch the ground in all the wrong places. She moved in at once, and for a few days she seemed pleased. She swept the floor, cooked a little stew, and stepped outside in the mornings without having to bend her head down. That lasted long enough for her to get used to it. Then she decided it wasn't enough. She stood outside the cottage and said she wished for something bigger. Something with a bit of yard, something people could see from the road. The river moved along its path without a sound, and the next morning the cottage was gone, and in its place stood a house with 2 rooms and a roof that didn't leak. She walked through it with her hands on her hips and said this was more like it. She lived there a short while before she said she wanted something finer, something with windows that caught the light, something that showed she hadn't been forgotten. The house grew again. This time it had wide floors, tall windows, and a front step that made her stand straighter. She walked from room to room, nodding as if she'd been expecting it. A few days later, she told herself she deserved help. She wanted servants, so she wouldn't have to carry wood or sweep floors anymore. And the next morning, she had servants. They cooked, they swept, and they tended the grounds for her. They moved quietly and didn't question her. She rested more and complained more. Each time she said she wanted something grander, the river answered. People in the village noticed, but they kept their thoughts to themselves. They had heard stories about places where fairies lived near the water, and they knew better than to test it. One evening the woman looked out over her yard and said she ought to live like a queen. She didn't whisper it. She didn't hesitate. She said it in the same way she'd said everything else, believing the world owed her the next thing she named. The river stayed quiet as the light faded. It didn't rush. It didn't rise. It simply listened. The next morning she woke expecting a palace. Instead, she found herself back in the vinegar bottle, sitting on the cold floor she thought had been left behind for good. The fine rooms were gone, the tall windows were gone, the servants were gone, and only the bottle remained. Before she could step outside, the mouth of the bottle sealed with a cork. She pushed against it, but it held firm. The ground beneath her shifted, and the bottle tipped towards the river. The current then caught it and carried it along. A few people said they saw something along the river bobbing in the water, and they turned slowly as it drifted around the bend, but no one followed it. The river didn't speak, and no one asked it to. They only said the old woman had asked for more than the place could give, and the fairy that lived in that water had heard enough. So, this is a story about river fairies, and they appear in plenty in these old stories, especially in places where the water bends or slows, and people believe some stretches of river paid attention to the words spoken near them. And a fairy living there might grant what it overheard. It wasn't kindness or punishment, it was just how the river behaved, very literal and direct, and quick to act on what it overheard, and it was eager to deliver it. So these tales usually follow the same pattern. A small wish is granted, then a larger one, until the requests grow too big for the spirit to tolerate. And at that point, the magic pulls back, and everything returns to its original shape. In Vinegar Bottle stories, going back to the bottle isn't about teaching someone a lesson. It's simply the fairy ending its part of the bargain when things tip out of balance. Some versions say the bottle doesn't stay put once the magic withdraws. They say the river carries it away, the same way it carried off anything else that didn't belong on its banks. Folks repeated that part to remind each other to be careful with what they said around old water. You never knew which words would be taken as an invitation. I'm Papa G, and this has been Feral Folktales. Until next time.